Since 1996, the Latin America Public Opinion Project, or LAPOP, has conducted surveys in 26 countries in the Americas in order to measure citizen views on political tolerance, citizen participation, local government, corruption, authoritarianism, and many other topics related to democratic politics. Talking about his organization's work in assessing both perceptions and experiences of corruption on the continent is Mitchell Seligson, Director of LAPOP.
The first surveys we carried out were back in Nicaragua in 1996, and back then, 15 years ago, I personally was very skeptical that if I asked people about whether they had to pay a bribe or asked to pay a bribe, that they would tell me anything. And so we started the field work in Nicaragua, and to my great surprise, people seemed more than willing to talk about the experiences, disagreeable experiences. And so they openly referred to the problems of bribes they've had in local government, in the school system, in the health system, with the police. And so we began to get the feeling that we really could ask these questions and get reasonable answers. But even then, we were skeptical about the whole question about over and under reporting. We were worried that if people didn't like the incumbent government, they were making up issues of corruption. Or on the other hand, if they really were supporters of the government, they would tend to suppress any reference to corruption. So when we got the data set in, we had a fairly large sample then, if I'm recall, about 6,000 respondents all over Nicaragua. We started doing some statistical analysis to control for that. That is, we asked them which party they supported, and we controlled for it. And we found some minor effects. That is, people who were supporters of the regime were likely to suppress a little bit of the levels of corruption. People who were critics of the regime were more likely to, more willing to report corruption. But the effect was really at the margin. So we became convinced that we were dealing with valid and reliable measures that we could pick up in surveys, at least in Latin America, the part of the world where the Latin American Public Opinion Project operates. It seems to me the biggest lesson we've learned is that measuring with surveys corruption victimization is likely to produce more valid and reliable data than measuring the perception of corruption. That is the question, how corrupt do you think this system is, or how much corruption do you think there is in this country or this government? The reason why we found that is that we've, for example, looked at interviews in Bolivia, a country which on corruption victimization is very high. Not the highest we've measured in the Americas, that's Haiti, but Bolivia is very high, that we find corruption in all walks of life. And yet when we ask people, how much corruption do you think there is around here, they say, not that much. On average, they say it's not that much. So it seems what we see is that people sort of become accustomed to a way of life in which corruption is the norm rather than the exception. And they consider that to be more or less the way things are. Yet in other countries, which have much lower levels of corruption, Chile is a good example, Costa Rica is a good example, a number of Central American countries are very low in corruption. But we might have people saying, oh, the corruption here is terrible, really high. And so we found in our analytical work, using the data sets and running regressions, that the strongest measures and the strongest work we get is systematically out of the corruption victimization, and we tend to rely on that rather than on the sense that people have. I mean, the sense might tell you something, but one of the things it seems to be telling us a lot is how focused is the government on trying to wipe out corruption. So the more attention that's placed on wiping out corruption, the more people seem to be sensitive to it, and the more they might think that there's a lot of it. So I think that has to be taken into consideration in any work that's being done with data sets like this.